This video is all about using ZRemesher in conjunction with other ZBrush tools to retopologize not only faces, but entire bodies, or really whatever you want. It starts out pretty basic, so check out the chapter list to see if there's anything in later chapters that might be interesting to you. Of course, we'll utilize polygroups, but we'll also deep dive into appending existing topology with ZSphere topology, the topology brush, ZModeler edge extrusion, surface snapping, and vert attraction capabilities, the different ZRemesh midline algorithms, projecting surfaces, subdividing and projecting details from one mesh to another, using Polypaint to control polygon density, shrink-wrapping primitive topology, and finally a reminder to check out the ZBrush 2021 What's New series that shows how to utilize all these techniques in all sorts of wacky and maybe interesting ways, including shrink-wrapping primitives, using ZModeler topology techniques, dynamic cloth collision, and of course, ZRemesher. Alright, we're going to talk about how to use ZRemesher and ZSpheres to retopologize a face and give you at least close to the geometry you're looking for, because there's some nuance in regards to what ZRemesher can handle nicely and easily, and also what you probably better spend, instead of troubleshooting ZRemesher, just going in and fixing what you need to fix. So first of all, we have a head here. This is going to be a Dynamesh head. This could be a head with just miscellaneous topology that you're working on, and you want to use ZRemesher to give you nice edge loops. If we go over here to Polyframe or hit Shift F to show your polyframes here, we can go through and start dividing this thing up into different polygroups. Now, before I do that, I'm going to talk about problem areas that you're going to run into. One is ZRemesher wants to put nice even topology over everything in your model, but things that go to like points like this, and then any nuanced detail like the corners of this lip in here, it's going to be difficult for ZRemesher to pick that up. And also like putting perfect edge loops around the eyeballs and the mouth so that you have great animatable topology, you may have to go in and do that manually. Now, if I was going to animate this, I would remove the smile from his face, put it in a nice neutral pose so that I can build in a smile later. But let's just say we're going to retopologize this with a smile built in. That's also fine. So I would probably, in here, let's go ahead and get rid of the corners of this mouth. I can always sculpt that in later, but right now I'm more worried about getting nice edge loops using ZRemesher and giving it an easier problem to solve. So I'm going to go through here and I'm just going to smooth this out a bit. I can still give myself indications. I'll go in here with my Damien standard brush, so BDS for your Damien standard brush, and I can go through here and be like, okay, the lips are going to just curve around like so, and then on the inside, that'll be the inside of the lip. So this whole ring right here is basically the ring I want to follow for my lips. And like I said, those folds and creases, I can put those in later. This is a much easier problem for ZRemesher to solve. So, obviously you'll be losing a little detail, but it should be generally detailed. It's easy to get back. Around the eyeballs here, we can help ZRemesher out by putting in control loops. You can do that with ZRemesher guides, BZR. I prefer to use polygroups in order to determine where those are. However, before I do that, I'm going to be kind of smoothing this geometry out and changing it just a bit. So what I'm going to do is go up here to my history and control tap the latest point in history. That's going to store these verts, the vert position, so that I can always project back to them later on if I change the geometry too much. So that gives me like a projectable state stored in there. Another option is you can duplicate this entire subtool off by going in here to subtool duplicate, and then instead of using subtool project history, you can use project all. I like project history, so that's what I'm going to use. So let's go ahead and start dividing this thing up into different polygroups. So again, I'm going to turn on polyframe here. You'll see up here we have line and fill turned on. If you want, you can turn off line, makes it a little bit easier to see. You can also go in here to your materials and choose maybe a skin shader 4, really allow you to see what's going on with your geometry. So I'm going to go through here really quickly and just mask where I want my polygroups to go. So right along here is where I want one polygroup here. And you're going to see, my resolution isn't super great. It's not like a super high detailed mesh, so it's going to get a little fuzzy along here, but we can fix that. One thing you can do, so you can see I did an outline around this eyeball. You can go in here to masking. I'm going to hold down Control Alt and tap my object, which is the same thing as going in here to mask, sharpen mask. That's just a shortcut for it. Alternatively, or the opposite of that, you can hold down Control and tap, and that'll blur your mask out. I don't want to do that. So I've sharpened up my mask here, and I want to go ahead and mask the inside of this eyeball as well. So I'm going to go in here to Mask Region, Analyze Region, mask a little bit inside there, say Fill Region. That'll go ahead and fill that for me. So now that I have a mask in here, I'm going to hit Control W on my keyboard. That'll make it its own polygroup. At some point, I'm going to continue adding more polygroups around the face, and I am going to want to smooth these lines out. You can do it as you go. Underneath Brush, go in here to Smooth Brush Modifiers, hold down Shift, and change your weighted smooth mode to Groups Border. That's option number 6. So again, hold down Shift so that you're in your smooth brush. Go into Smooth Brush Modifiers underneath your brush menu. If this isn't open, just it's your brush menu right here. I have it docked to the left. Hold down Shift, change your weighted smooth mode to 6. That will make it so you're only smoothing out the border, well, kind of, the border between your polygroups. You'll see we're losing a little bit of volume around here, but what we're really trying to do is get rid of those aliased edges that ZRemesher is going to look at and try to build those aliased edges in. So we want a nice smooth border along here. That's one way to do it. We'll show you another way in just a second. Again, this little nuance piece right here may be difficult for ZRemesher to capture. We'll see how it does. If it doesn't get this right, it's not a big deal. Just a heads up, I'm probably going to end up just deleting the geometry around the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the ears. It's just easier to just build what I need to rather than trying to finagle or finesse ZRemesher into giving me the perfect result that I want, but we'll give it a shot. So now that we've done that, I'm going to hold down Control Shift and isolate. So Control Shift, click on the yellow polygroup here. So I'm going to hold down Control, and we're going to go through here, and we're just going to mask this open area here. And we'll give another edge ring. So generally speaking, for animatable orifices on your head, let's go ahead and you're just going to do concentric edge rings. So around the mouth, around the eyes, just nice concentric edge rings. There's nuance to where you want to put your geometry, the star geometry and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into that for this video, but just our general purpose is just to get concentric edge rings around the eyes and mouth. So that they animate. So I'm going to hit Control-Alt-Tap to sharpen this up again. We'll check and make sure, because right here you'll see there's like a little crease in here. ZRemesher will build that in, so it's not a huge deal. But again, that might cause a little bit of issues with ZRemesher. So I'm going to hit Control-W to make that all one polygroup. Hold down Control-Shift and tap in my document. So now we're making, again, just continuing our concentric edge rings. I'm going to go ahead and leave this one jagged. You'll see let me make that more obvious here. So you see these jagged lines around here. Another alternative to going in here and smoothing it manually with our option we just talked about, you can go in here to Mask. Underneath Masking, there's a Mask by Feature. You can change this to Groups, so you can mask your group's border. So if you click that, all of your group's borders will be masked. You can Control-Tap to invert that, and then you can go down here to Tool, just above masking is Deformation, and then you can go in here and say, Polish by Feature. You can just tap that a few times. If you really want to smooth it out, you can change it to an open circle. And again, you can just tap that a few times and it'll go ahead and smooth out all of your polygroup borders. Then Control-Drag to unmask. And there we go, got a nice smooth line. While we're doing this, again, we stored those points in history. You can go back through here and say Project History. That'll move your verts back to the original position of your face. And that's also what we're going to use to project our detail back. So I'm going to go ahead and time lapse the rest of this just using those techniques. We're going to go around the mouth and the nose and the ears and kind of break this face up. But again, starting from the most important parts, which is your eyes and your mouth, and then going and then filling in the blanks in between there. When I get to a part like this where I have a piece of geometry that isn't attached to any other geometry, I can also go in here to Polygroups, and we can say Auto Groups. So again, this isn't vert welded in the visibility state that it's in, because again, I masked here, I hit Control-W, then I Control-Shift tapped it and Control-Shift dragged. So there's a gap between the mouth bag and the lips. So it's just an easy way to isolate this polygroup if just the head topology and the inner mouth bag topology is selected. Just going in here and saying Auto Groups will group anything differently that's not vert welded. So you see I'm getting a dark blue here and a kind of a greenish blue in here. So now those are different polygroups. I'll make that more obvious here by hitting Control-W. So again, I'll go ahead and hit Control Shift and tap, and then we'll just continue working our way around. And you can also use visibility selection. So you see I have, I'm getting down to this part of the face. I can go and hold down Control Shift, grab my select lasso, and then if I want these to be all one polygroup, I can just hold down Control Shift and then Alt, and then I can remove those polygons, hit Control W, and that'll polygroup whatever's visible on my screen, and then I can just keep working this back. So I'll go ahead and just grab these pieces here, hit Control W. So now if I hit Control Shift and tap, you'll see that I've been creating edge rings or polygroup rings around here. Now, one problematic area is going to be this tight corner in here. So if you ever want to merge two polygroups and just let ZRemesher handle it, just Control Shift click between two polygroups. That'll select both of them, hit Control W, and now we have that merged into all one polygroup here. Now, if you get onto an ear, this ear's pretty thick, so it's not going to be a problem. But if you have a very thin part of your mesh and your mask brush is very large, it might start masking on the back. One thing you can do is hold down Control, and then underneath your brush settings, go in here to Auto Masking and turn on Backface Mask. Again, holding down Control, so you're turning on Backface Mask for your mask pin brush, and that way when you're masking, it won't go through your mesh. This will actually work for sculpting brushes as well. And in this instance, I noticed after I hit Control W that I missed a little piece in here. You can go through here, if you have big enough geometry, if I turn the line back on, you can actually hold down, go into your ZModeler brush, BZM, hold down Alt and start painting on this polygroup, and then let go of Alt and tap Shift with your pen still held down, and that'll allow you to paint with whatever polygroup that you want. This is that I want to select it. You can add that back in. If I undo that, I can also, like we did before, hold down Control Shift and just tap the purple section, and then this floating geometry, you can go in here and say Polygroup Auto Groups, and that'll, again, anything that's not vert welded will get its own polygroup. However, you'll notice this polygroup on the left is different than that on the right. So what you'll have to do is hit Control Shift and then do a geometry, modify topology, and then do a mirror and weld across the x-axis, assuming your mesh is symmetrical. That's totally fine. So now you have, you know, this polygroup and this polygroup, and again, if you just click between those two, it'll grab them both. Then you can just hit Control W to make it all one polygroup. And this geometry right here is going to be really difficult for ZRemesher because it's going to want to put a geometry line along here and then also kind of put a little gap in here. So I'm going to simplify this again with my ZModeler brush. Just hold down Alt, start painting, tap Shift with my pen held down. I'm just going to paint this in just to make this a little bit of a less intense transition in between here. And once we start getting to the neck area, we can go to the side. If we turn off perspective and hold down Shift, you can snap it to the side. Hold down Control Shift, go into Slice Curve, and we can use this. You can hold down Control Shift and start dragging out your curve. Hold down Spacebar to move it around. If you Alt tap once, that'll put in kind of a bendy line. If you Alt tap twice, that'll do a straight line. So you can use this to your advantage to kind of go through here and just start slicing through polygroups. And the benefit of this is it will cut a straight line, generally speaking. Sometimes it'll get a little bit weird in some of these tight spots, but it'll cut a straight line through your mesh, so you don't actually have to smooth these out if you don't want. So we'll just go ahead and put a couple lines through here to indicate those are where I want my polygroups for my neck. And the rest of this head I really don't worry, I'm not going to care too much about, so I'll just leave that. So once again, if I want to go through manually, well, first I'm going to check for any stray polygroups. You'll see I have a little red polygroup in here, so I'm going to isolate it. Or click between these two. If it is connected to another big piece of geometry, it might be easier, again, just to use my ZModeler brush, BZM, and then again, hold down Alt and then tap Shift with my pen held down. I'm also going to go through here and smooth this out a little bit. It looks like this geometry is going to be difficult for ZRemesher to kind of navigate, so I'm just going to smooth these lines out here. And just like we did before, if you hold down Shift, go down here to your smooth brush modifiers with our Shift held down, where it's still in weighted smooth mode of 6, which is just smoothing out the polygroups line. So here's another stray one. You can also go into polygroups. There's merge stray groups, so to go ahead and merge any weird stray groups for you, as well as merging similar groups will sometimes go in and do a little bit of cleanup for you. Now, instead of going through here and just doing all this manually, which it might be a little safer, just it gives you another chance to go through your mesh and look for any problematic polygroups. So I prefer to go through here manually, but if you don't want to, again, like we talked about before, go into masking, mask by group. So these three will be on by default. Turn off border and crease and just mask by your groups. Control tap to invert that. Go in here to deformation and do a polish by feature. I'm going to do a closed circle to maintain my volumes a little bit better. Another thing too is you can, let's go ahead and control drag to unmask. Go in here to masking, mask by features group, and then maybe do a grow, just to kind of grow that mask a little bit, and then control tap to invert that mask, or hit the invert button here. So now with that, we can go down or up to deformation, again, a polish by feature, and just tap that a few times, or click and drag if you really want to smooth quite a bit. So now all of our polygroups are pretty smooth. So now we can use these polygroups along with ZRemesher to give us a start to our geometry. Looks like we got some problematic areas in here where the geometry starts disappearing. It's not actually disappearing or has a hole, it's just a drawing. The geometry is having a hard time on some of these things. So we have our polygroups generally laid out on our face. So let's go in here to geometry. Underneath the tool menu, we have geometry and ZRemesher. And actually, now that I think about it, underneath tool, subtool, project, again, let's do a project history. Remember, we held down control and tapped that original points stored. Let's go ahead and hit project history to move our geometry back to the original position. And then now we're going to go down here to geometry ZRemesher. So right now, the adaptive size is set to 50. The lower you do this, the more ZRemesher wants to make all of your polygons about the same size, as well as when you go in here, right now it's set the same. If I turn that off, you're going to see my target polygon count here. I can change it to whatever I want. So if I want to say, hey, make this head 5,000 polygons and make all of the geometry about the same size, I'm going to turn adaptive size down to 0. I'm going to go in here and say, keep my groups. By default, this will be up at 1, and that will automatically run a smooth for you. However, it does cause you to lose volume. It's going to kind of melt your mesh. So we've already done the smoothing part manually. So I'm going to turn smooth groups down to 0. Our groups should already be pretty smooth. So now, again, target polygon count of 5, smooth groups down to 0, keep groups because we want to keep our groups so that ZRemesher uses those to draw our geometry. And then adaptive size down to 0, nice even quads, hit ZRemesher. Now, one caveat is the lower adaptive size is, it's going to hit your poly count as close as it can and keep your polygons about the same size, which is nice. However, any nuanced areas, and it actually did a pretty good job, but any areas with like tight turns or really sharp features, it might fail on. So at that point, you can hit Control Z to undo. And there's also a retry option if you want to look that up, but I'm just going to hit undo, and you can start moving this adaptive size up. The higher you make your adaptive size, the more the angle changes or any nuanced areas, it'll build in more geometry in those areas. However, it's going to throw more geometry at us. So when the adaptive size at 21 and our target polygon count of 5 and we ZRemesh, I think the original one was about 8K points. This result is 9.3K points, so it built in a little more geometry in these little wiggly areas on the face, but it did a generally good job. Now, there may be some areas, let me just see if I can find some, where it just couldn't do a good job, and I am pleasantly surprised by this result, but like in here, you know, this geometry is not great. I'm gonna hold down Shift and kind of smooth this out so I can see the geometry a little bit better. And then at this point, you can go into your ZModeler brush, go BZM. You could go through here and like start splitting these. You can split edge here. You can also, if you hit your comma key, go in here to brush and scroll all the way over until you get to your ZModeler folder. There is a ZModeler slice in here, as well as a ZModeler topology for rebuilding topology, which we'll use in a bit. So if I double click ZModeler slice, that'll load up the ZModeler slice brush, and all that is a ZModeler brush with slice set up. So if I hover over a point and hold down spacebar, you'll see it's set to slice mesh. If I hover over a edge, it's set to slice mesh. If I hover over a face, it's set to slice mesh as well. So I'm going to click on this point and then this point. That'll slice right through here. I'm going to go, I don't need any creases, so I'm just going to have geometry crease, uncrease all, and now I can go through here and, you know, clean up this geometry a little bit. Same thing for over here. I can just kind of slice through. Now I hit this here and the last point I clicked was here, so I wanted to slice through here. Undo that, hit your space bar to reset the brush, and now you can start from this point and slice over to here. You can also hover over an edge. Let's go back to our regular ZModeler brush, BZM, and I'm going to hover over this edge. I'm going to set this to spin, and you can spin edges to reroute which direction they're going in. So you can manually go through here, and again, I'll just keep hitting uncrease all to get rid of my creases, and go through and like you can like collapse edges in here with your ZModeler brush. You can move edges, you can spin edges. You can also hold down Alt to spin edges different directions. If it gives you an error, it's not symmetrical. Again, geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld across the X. Assuming your mesh is symmetrical, it'll go ahead and do that. You can also hover over a face or a point and say bridge 2 points, and you can just manually bridge points, and then you can hover over an edge and say delete edge, whatever you want to do to kind of go through and clean up your mesh. However, you know, that's a lot of work in and of itself. You know, you might have to go in here and say, okay, bridge these 2 points and then collapse this edge down, and I don't know, it tends to be a lot of points. Same a lot of work. Same thing here, just go through and just collapse these edges down. But that's one option for rebuilding a head. Now, I'm going to go all the way back to our control tapped point in our history, back to our original head. And let's say we don't want to have to go through all of that. Just give me a decent result and let me rebuild what I need to. This might be a faster, easier method. So what I'm going to do is, you know, put it back here. ZRemesher, I'm going to take the adaptive size down, you know, maybe to 5. Have X symmetry turned on so we get a ZRemesh symmetrical result. And then target polygon count of 5 is fine. I'll hit ZRemesher and just let it build some geometry for me. I already know in problematic areas I can just simply delete that geometry and rebuild it from scratch. So if I want to get my edge loops perfect for like the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and honestly this did a pretty decent job, but this ear, you can see it kind of had a hard time. And let's say I want to go even lower. So what I like to do is, again, this point in history, we want to store those verts, so control tap that point in history, and then here's our ZRemesh result. I'm going to go in here and say project history just to move our verts back to where they should be. I'm going to go down here to ZRemesher half, even lower, and then again, just project history, our verts back out. So now you're going to see, okay, we're getting some real problem areas. This part of the ear, this part of the eye isn't done, the mouth isn't done, but the rest is probably salvageable. So what I can do is just go through here and hold down Control Shift, select lasso, and just get rid of all the problematic areas, because I can always rebuild those. So if I took too much, I can do Control Shift X to Control Shift S. In this case, Control Shift X to expand, and that's expanding the selection. Control Shift S to shrink, so I can kind of just go back and forth and, you know, just get rid of these pieces that I don't want. The nose and the nostrils, maybe I want to rebuild those, so I'll just hold down Control Shift and Alt and get rid of that geometry. The eyeballs obviously are pretty bad, and the ears. So again, I'm just going to go through and just delete any geometry that I should probably rebuild by hand. And at this point, I'm going to say geometry, modify topology, and delete hidden. And then for the eyeballs here, if I Control Shift drag over these, it's going to drag all the way through and grab these. So I can Control Shift Alt here, so I just have the eyeballs. Or you can go through here and just mask what you don't like, and then go down here and say visibility, hide point, Control Shift drag again, and then geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. Or you can go through here, mask, hit Control W, Control Shift tap the polygroup you want to keep, geometry, modify topology, geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. So now we've gotten rid of the problematic geometry. The rest of it's fine. If you need to clean up any single areas, you can hover over a face with ZModeler brush BZM, hover over a face, spacebar, and then say delete a single poly here. You can also go back in here and bridge. You can say bridge edges here to here, and then we can say insert single edge loop down the middle, and then you can say hover over a point and say stitch 2 points here to here, and then Control W. So you can kind of rebuild a little bit if you want to, but let's say this geometry is generally okay. I want to go through and just manually build the geo that I need. So one thing we can do is I'm going to append a Z-sphere. So with the Z-sphere selected, I'm going to tap X on my keyboard to go make this a symmetrical Z-sphere because we're going to use it for topology. I'm going to hit E, so I go into scale. So W is move, E is scale. So we're going to scale this down, and we're just going to kind of put this in the middle of the head out of the way. If you want to see, turn on transparency. You can see we're just putting this right in the skull. So now we want to use this geometry as topology for the Z-sphere. I don't have access to it while it's part of the same subtool stack, so I'm going to select this, hit clone. That'll put out a copy of it just out here in my subtool palette. Go back to Z-sphere, go down here and say topology, select that clone geometry, and that will put that topology into the Z-sphere. Now, I need the original topology back in order to continue drawing, so I'm going to take my history for this object here and just go back to this history point, and now my original nice geometry's here. I have a Z-sphere, so I'm going to turn off polyframe. I'm going to switch my material out to matte cap white, drop it to a medium gray, and now I can see my topology and I can continue building the topology where I want. Now, one caveat, Z-sphere topology will only be able to grab up to 15,000 points. You know, so if I select this here, you'll see we're at 3,000 points. That's totally fine. If it's up to 15,000, you may not be able to do this. I'll show you another option. But since we can, I'm going to have my Z-sphere selected here. We have underneath topology, we selected topology. Now we want to go in here to edit topology. One thing I always like to do is control drag in my document to unmask any points that might be unmasked. And you also hold down control shift and tap. We'll switch this back to select rectangle. That'll bring back any, not that you would have any, but you can hide points from your Z-spheres. So control shift tap to make sure they're all here. And you can mask points of your Z-spheres. It won't show it being masked, but they are masked. You can't move them anymore. So if you ever run into an issue where you can't move your Z-sphere points, control drag out in your document. That'll unmask all your points. So now we have edit topology selected and we're ready to just go through and just continue drawing. However, it looks like I need to get rid of some of this extra geometry. So I'm going to hold down, well, make sure I'm in draw mode. So Q is draw mode, W, E, and R is move, scale, and rotate. In our case here with Z-spheres, I just need to worry about Q and W. W will allow us to go into move mode, and as I'm moving the Z-spheres, it'll stick to our object. Q will go into draw mode, and I can use it to draw. I can also hold down Alt and then tap, and that'll delete any points. So these points here, I want to, again, draw in manually my concentric edge rings. So I'm going to go through here and just get rid of any of this geometry where Z-spheres just didn't get me quite what I wanted. And then I'm going to use my ZRemesher topology to kind of fill in the gaps in between my important areas. So again, my important areas are my eyeball orifices, or I'm not quite sure the right word, but the openings for my eyes and the openings for my mouth. Right here too, we have extra lip geometry built in. I want to just go ahead and just hold down Alt and tap this again while I'm in draw mode. If you're in move mode and you're tapping these, holding down Alt, going, why isn't it deleting anything? Why is it moving to this other subtool? It's because you're in move mode, and if you Alt tap another subtool, it will select it. So go back to your Z-sphere, make sure you're in draw mode, hold down Alt, and continue tapping these in order to delete this extraneous geometry. Same thing for the ears. Looks like I deleted some extra stuff, but that's okay. The ears look fine. I can just redraw some of this. So let's talk about redrawing geometry. Again, I want to go around the really important edges here. So again, I'm going to hold down Q, make sure I'm in draw mode. If you have another point selected accidentally or you didn't notice it, and then you go over here and try to draw, it may try to, let me try to see if I can do it. So I have that one selected over there, and then I hit Q and I want to start over here. It's going to draw a line between those. Undo that. You can tap off in your document. That'll unselect everything, and then you can start drawing over here. You can also, whenever I'm in here close, I like to use right-click navigation. I'll have a link to ZBrush navigation in this description, but basically use your right-click button on your tablet pen in order to navigate when you're in these tight constrained areas while you're using Z-sphere topology. So now by using right-click navigation, it'll automatically clear everything because right-clicking will clear your selection. So you can start right in here, start from this point, go in, navigate around. You see it deselected everything, so I need to start back here, and then you can just go in here and just draw around the geometry that you want. So here I'm going around the eyelid here. and then kind of moving my camera, starting here, we'll go down one, and I'm just going to do, again, concentric rings around this eyelet. If you ever get in a pot like this, just control tap, right click again, and then you can just start from that point. So now I've got two concentric rings and I want to put geometry around here. An easy way to do that is just to start at one point and then just tap back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then you can quickly just bridge those gaps here. And then once you're done with this, you can switch from draw mode, which is Q, again to W, which is move mode, and then you can go in here and move points around. If you want to add more geometry, like, oh, okay, I should have moved these around here and I want more geometry through here, again, hit Q, use your right-click navigation to reset, and then just draw that in, and then hit W to switch back to move mode. So again, between Q and W, you can pretty quickly go through here, and like I said, you can draw these two lines here. If you want to delete this extra edge in here, if you hold down Alt and tap, it's going to delete a lot of extra geometry. Hit Q, and then just tap in the middle. That'll put a point in the middle, and then hold down Alt and delete that, and that'll just delete the line there. And then we can go through here and again continue massaging this. So now that we have this, I'm going to hit Q. We're going to start from this point here, and we're just going to keep working our concentric rings around our eyeball. And like I said, you know, hitting Q and then W and drawing, you might realize you want to massage some of this geometry over and add more. Just hit Q, and then you can go right down the middle, and then W, and then move the points out. Again, it's all snapping while you do this. And now on this side, we're at the point where we had our ZRemesher geometry here. So you can just kind of bridge these together. And now you have custom-made geometry around the important parts. And then these parts that aren't so important, although I would argue this whole area is pretty important. But again, just for demonstration purposes, we're going to go ahead and just say this is good enough. So now we're just going to kind of bridge the gaps between here. If it auto saves while you're doing this, and then it kind of spits you out in a state where it's like, hey, I was editing topology and now I can't, go back down here to your topology. It just turned that off. Whenever it quick saves, it's a feature kind of, whenever it saves your object, it wants to turn edit topology off so it doesn't corrupt your file. So just turn edit topology back on, and there you're right back where you started. So if you save a file, or if ZBrush saves a file for you with quick save, just know that you will have to go through and start, or go through and manually turn on edit topology. So here, you know, I don't want this to go across. You can right click this here, it'll select it. If you right click nowhere, it'll deselect everything. If you right click a specific point, it'll start you from that point, and then you can just continue drawing. And then like I said before, just hit Q and put a dot right in the middle of this edge that we don't like, and then hold down Alt to delete it while you're in draw mode. So you can kind of rebuild your edge flow like so. So continue to go through and, you know, build your concentric edge rings around the mouth, finish out the ears, and then when you're done, you can hit A for adaptive skin. And you're going to see if I go into solo mode, it turned it into like a Dynamesh. It completely changed my geometry. I don't want that. Go in here to adaptive skin with your Z-sphere selected. Turn density down to 1. So this will show you the actual density of the geometry we're drawing. And then Dynamesh resolution down to 0. We don't want any Dynamesh. If it doesn't update, hit A to turn off adaptive skin, or hit the preview button. Hit A again, or turn on the preview button. And now we have our geometry that we're drawing. So I didn't finish this out with Z-spheres. You'll see, you know, we just kind of redrew this area in here. I'm going to use another option, the ZModeler Topology brush, to finish the rest of this out. So I'll go out of solo mode here. And so we have our Z-sphere here, and we have our skin, our original head showing here. So with the Z-sphere selected, this isn't real geometry. You can start sculpting it and changing it if you want to. It'll let you do it. Just be careful because, again, it is just a Z-sphere geometry. So if I want the real geometry from this adaptive skin result, remember we're down here in adaptive skin, hitting A, which is turning preview on and off, go down here and say make adaptive skin, and then that'll put the skin Z-sphere result out here. Now don't confuse that with our clone that we made earlier. This is the newer one. If you ever want to know which one is the newest, when you go in here to append it to our subtool stack, it'll just be the last one in here. So just grab that skin Z-sphere. If you're done using Z-spheres, it might be safer just to delete it out of your scene, and then now you have real geometry. If you need to, make sure you tap X to go into X symmetry. And one thing I always like to double check is underneath display properties, double is turned on. If you turn that off, and your mesh mostly disappears, hit flip. That'll flip your geometry around. And this, so it'll look something like this. If it looks like this, hit flip and you're good to go. Double you can have on or off. Just be careful if you have it on that you don't accidentally have flip normals. So now that we have some geometry, and let's say we want to use another method in order to go ahead and connect these or bridge this geometry here. So I'm going to go down here to geometry. You can see we have some open border edges with creases on them. I'm going to go down here to geometry crease, say uncrease all. And then if I hit the comma key, back when we were in our brush tab and we were in our ZModeler folder, there we choose the slice one, which we've already talked about. There is also a ZModeler topology. If you double click that and hit B on your keyboard, you'll see your ZModeler topology brush has been loaded. This will allow you, let's go out of solo mode. So we have our original sitting back here. I'm going to switch back to matte cap gray or whatever material works for you. So now we have topology sitting on top of this face. With them both showing, I can use our other option. So subtool project all, that'll project these verts back to our high-res original. So let's go ahead and turn on transparency. There might be a ghost option on by default. Go ahead and turn that off. And in fact, let's switch this back to like skin shader 4 so we can see a little bit better. So now, again, with our ZModeler topology brush, if we hover over an edge with that brush, you'll see it's automatically set to extrude an edge, snap the surface with smart attraction. If we hover over a point, it is set to move by brush radius, snap the surface with an attraction ability. If we hover over a face, set to do nothing, because when we're retopologizing, we don't need to do any face actions. So now with this, what I can do is start drawing geometry based on the geometry that's already here. Again, if I want to remove some of this, like I can hold down Alt and just start painting on this with the brush, and then I can hover over one face. And if you're in your ZModeler topology brush and you hover over a face that's set to do nothing, you can set it to delete temporarily, and then those that geometry you painted over, just tap one of them and it'll delete them all. And then you might want to go back to face, hover over a face, hold down space bar and change this to do nothing. And now we can start extruding edges. If I hover over an edge, again, with our ZModeler topology brush, you'll see it's set to extrude edge. I can go through here and just start extruding edges in. And if I extrude another edge and get close enough to the other one, it'll automatically snap. You can also, while you're extruding edge, tap Alt once and it'll extrude an entire edge loop. So you can go through here and you can quickly kind of go through here and extrude an entire edge loop. Now if you want to switch back to just extruding an edge instead of an edge loop, you can tap Alt once and that'll go ahead and just go back to a single edge. And then like I said before, tap Alt again and that'll bring out an edge loop. In fact, you can, the third time you do tap Alt, let me see if I can get a better example, up here around the eyeball here. So again, if I hold down Alt and tap, the default is just one edge. Tap Alt once will be an entire edge ring, and then hold down Alt will be also an entire edge ring, depending on the geometry you have. So not a great example, but those are the three modes you can switch between. So again, like I said, start extruding an edge, tap Alt to bring out an entire edge ring, and then you can go up here to move point and just snap these points together. So you can start rebuilding your geometry using kind of like a quad draw methodology to go through here and just start moving edges and snapping points and creating geometry. If you do want to start, geometry in the middle here and there's nothing for you to grab, one easy way to make geometry is BTO, Topology Brush. Make your draw size down to 1, and that will allow us to go through here and, you know what? The nostril's not going to be that interesting. I was going to draw it, but it's just basically a square. Let's do something a little more interesting. I'm going to start drawing a lip line through here. So I'm going to go along here again with my topology brush BTO. I'm going to switch back to my original high-res head. I'm going to turn off polyframe, and I'm just going to drag along this lip here, and then on the inside I'm going to drag along here, and then I'm just going to drag across, and that's going to create geometry. Now, the reason I went to a draw size of 1, you don't have to do that while you're drawing. In fact, now that I say that, maybe better, tap S on your keyboard, bring your draw size up a bit, or go up here and change your draw size. I'm going to go in here and put a line along here. So now, if I go across, you'll see the curve lines are bigger. It's not as small. And then we have this available. Now, if you do have subdivision history on the head you're drawing on, go down here to geometry, delete lower, delete higher. Well, go to your highest and hit delete lower, do this, and then when you're done following these instructions, you can go back and hit this reconstruct subdivision history again on your high-res head. In this case, I don't have any subdivision history, so I'm totally fine. Now, I've drawn my geometry with the topology brush. If I tap on here, you're going to see it gives me an edge strip, but it has thickness to it. That's because my brush draw size is determining that thickness. So if I hit Control Z, make my draw size bigger, and then tap away from my object, you're going to see it makes a very thick strip. However, I want this to be a very thin, single-sided strip. So again, take your draw size down to 1, tap away from your object. You might have to use your mouse for this, and that will just leave me a polygon strip. If right now it's attached to this head, it's just part of that subtool. So I'm going to go down here to split mask points or unmasked points, doesn't really matter. I'm going to do mask points, and that will put this strip of geometry into its own subtool. So if I turn off solo, you'll see I have my high-res head, my strip of geometry, and then my low-res head. So I'm going to take this strip of geometry, use this bent down arrow to move it down right above my geometry that I'm building, and then I'm going to say merge down. Say okay, and now this geometry is all together. I'm going to turn on polyframe so you can see it. You'll see they're different polygroups. If you want to make them the same, just hit Control W. It'll make them all the same polygroup. And then I can go through here and continue, modeling with my ZModeler topology brush. So again, pulling out edges, going through here, we'll snap them in the middle, and then use our move brush here. Now, if it ever does get a little out of alignment, like, okay, it's snapped in the middle, but it's not right down the middle, again, geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld, that'll show you where your problems are. One option is to temporarily turn off X symmetry and just move one side obviously over to one side, and then do another mirror and weld. That'll just get it out of the way so it can do a nice clean mirror and weld down the middle. And then again, head back into your ZModeler topology brush and start moving stuff around. Make sure you turn X symmetry back on, and there you go. So now, again, just keep extruding edges, extruding polygroups. While you're extruding, again, you can tap Alt to switch back to just extruding a single edge, and there you go. Now you're just rebuilding geometry using that method. Again, if you have creases you don't want to see, go down to Geometry, Crease, just hit Uncrease All, and start rebuilding your head. I'm going to insert this here because it's going to probably come up. So you're going through here and you're moving geometry around, but what if you want to smooth an area out? In ZBrush, I don't think there's a way for you to smooth something and have it snap at the same time. But what you can do is you can go through here, and I'm going to turn on transparency with ghost turned off. I'm going to hold down shift to go into smooth, and I'm just going to smooth some verts out. I'm going to see if there's a better place for me to smooth. It's actually pretty decent, but let's say I want to go through here and just kind of smooth this geometry out. You're going to see it's slowly separating itself from my original high res. Of course, you can go through here and do a project all with the original high res showing, and that will snap it back. Also, when you're going through here and you're using your extrude edges, sometimes your edges will kind of leave the surface. You can just assign a hotkey to project all, or if you stored a history point, project history, or just have it available in your interface somewhere, and you can just quickly access, project all, just to, be able to smooth and then snap the geometry back to the high res surface. I'm going to go back to our save point in history, so we're going all the way back to our original geometry here via X symmetry turned on. And you know what? This is kind of a good best practice too. If you're going to be messing around with something, maybe duplicate it off and always have a working version sitting there ready to be used eventually. So, and if we know we're not going to use the eyes and the mouth geometry, we're going to build that separately. Let's hold down Control Shift, go into Select Lasso. I'm going to select the eye geometry, Control Shift drag to invert that selection, go to the side, hold down Control Shift Alt, grab the mouth area geometry, Control Shift Alt drag again, and you'll see we picked up a little bit of extra geo in the back. Control Shift Alt drag that. So now we just have the geometry we're going to end up rebuilding anyways. Control Shift drag, and then geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. We can also, we already know the ear might have a little bit of problem. We can go ahead and say Control Shift drag over the ear. We're not going to rebuild the ear manually, but we can allow ZRemesher to work on this piece separately and kind of focus in on this. Let's Control Shift drag, make sure we got, there we go. So we got all the ear geometry, and it's kind of sitting here. So instead of deleting, I'm going to go down here to split hidden. So now we have the ears in its own subtool, and the face in its own subtool. Now again, ZRemesher is going to want to build in those scraggly edges on our borders there. So let's go in here to masking. Go in here, instead of groups, we'll switch it to border. We'll say mask by feature. I'm going to go ahead and grow that a bit. Just hit that grow mask button, control tap to invert it, or hit the inverse button, and then go to deformation, and then just tap polish by feature. Open circle to kind of smooth those edges out a bit. Same thing for the ear. And the only reason we're masking our open border here, so mask by feature, border, and then grow, sorry, switch back to border, mask by feature, border, and then grow mask, control tap to invert that, is so we can save the detail. You know, we want that geometry, ZRemesher to follow that geometry. But now we're going to go down here to polish by feature, open circle, just to clean up that border edge. So now what we can do is, with this, just the ear showing, ZRemesher half, you know, adapt the size to whatever makes sense. We don't really have groups on this. We can turn that off, and then just keep hitting ZRemesher half and get this down, and let's watch it rebuild. While it's, you know, shrinking your geometry while it's rebuilding, remember, we held down control and stored those points in history, and or we have a version of this sitting out here. So you can either use project history to project your points back to your history points, or you can turn this original subtool on and then say project all. Either one should work. We'll go down to the head here, control drag to deselect, or to unmask. We have X symmetry turned on. Same deal. I'm just going to do half, adapt the size down to 5. No groups, so we'll just ZRemesh this. So again, we already know we're going to rebuild the eyes. We already know we're going to rebuild the mouth, but I can use ZRemesher on the ears and then ZRemesher on the head. And you don't have to do half. You can dial in a size and go from there. I'm just doing half just to kind of get down to a size that I like. That's a little low. Maybe something like this. And then go through here, do any cleanup you want to do with your ZModeler brush like we already talked about. Whatever you want to do to kind of rebuild this geometry. And then I can take this ear, and then we can, again, merge down. So now the ear geometry is mixed with the head. This area right here isn't going to animate that much, so I'm totally fine just going through here. I'm going to switch over to my mouse, and I'm going to say stitch 2 points. I'm just going to kind of go around this border and just kind of stitch points together. So that way I have my contiguous face geometry, and then I have my ear geometry. And again, I don't really need to worry about cleaning this up. It's fine. Nothing's really going to animate back here. But at least I can have a ZRemeshed ear, a ZRemeshed head, stitch those results together, and then start rebuilding the face like we talked about earlier. One thing I should mention is, let's go back to where we had our head geometry and our history undo. I'm going to say geometry modify topology, delete hidden. And then again, masking, mask by feature, open border, grow mask, control tap to invert that mask, polish by feature here, X symmetry turned on. When you ZRemesh, for example, if we turn off half and change target polygon count down to, you know, maybe 1000. And again, we have X symmetry turned on. So transform, if you tap X on your keyboard, that'll activate symmetry by default across the X axis. Hit ZRemesher. Here's one result. I'm going to move this over to the side here. We're going to hit Shift S to save that as a snapshot on our document here. And then I'm going to undo that result. I'm going to hold down Alt. And then while holding down Alt, I'm going to hit ZRemesher. And that's going to give us a new algorithm for that midline. So now if I compare these two, you'll see right here in the nape of the neck is a different result. Right here in the brow area is a different result, and I would argue maybe a slightly better result. So use the Alt algorithm with ZRemesher and play around. Again, that target polygon count may be a little low, so let's try maybe 1.5. Hold down Alt and ZRemesh. And that might be a little more optimal. Now, if you did store a snapshot on your document here and it's in your way, just hit Control-N on your keyboard, and then I'll go ahead and clear your canvas. I'm going to go back here to my stored points in history, back to our original high-res face here, and you can use other topology if you want. So I'm going to hit comma on my keyboard. We're going to go in here to Tool. I'm going to load this demo head here. So just double-click it, hit comma key to go out of Lightbox here. So with our demo head selected, we're going to go down here to Subdivision Level 1. So here we have face geometry. So I'm going to say delete higher, and we're going to use this face geometry to project to this arbitrary geometry here. So I'm going to go back to this head. We're going to say append that demo head here. Again, we've deleted the higher res subdivision level, so we're just going to project the low res and then subdivide and project our details. We need to make sure these are in the same spot, so I'm going to hit W on my keyboard, and that goes into gizmo mode, and I can use this to kind of scale this into place. So here we have just some general topology in here. I'm going to turn on, make sure X symmetry is turned on, and then I'm going to move these points kind of into the position they need to go. And now he's got a pretty extreme face here, so let's turn off transparency, and I can kind of move, again, this geometry generally into place. If I need to move these lips separately, with brush, move brush selected, go down here to auto masking, turn on topological. You can change that range down to like 1.25 or something like that. And then you can go through here and you can move the upper lip independently from the lower lip a little bit easier. And again, you can turn on transparency. If you do want to sculpt through an object, transparency with ghost turned on will allow you to do that. So if you want to hold down shift to smooth and then use a clay brush to kind of get these points where they need to go, feel free. In the case of the ear, I'm going to just give it a very nice broad mask. Control tap to invert that mask, and I'm going to try to move the ears into place. Again, that we're making some pretty big changes here. Now, if I scale this ear up, you're going to see it's going to scale away and towards the mid-center. Go in here to turn on local symmetry, turn off dynamic, and that'll scale on its local axis. So we can kind of go through here and move, scale, and rotate just our ear geometry. Of course, you know, I've got to kind of, I'm going to control tab to really broaden the effect of that mask and kind of soften it a bit. And again, we're really pushing and pulling this geometry around, so we're kind of stressing it. Then I alt tap in the middle again with the LSIM turned on, alt tap to set my pivot, and then we'll try and carefully rotate and scale and move this ear into place. We'll go into solo mode, control drag to unmask, and then smooth these bits out. So again, just kind of move the geometry into place. There are other options for this. You can use a program called ZWrap or Wrap, and that will allow you to kind of select points and move all of your geometry at once. Of course, this is just ZBrush stuff, so I'm just going to do it the ZBrush way, but there are a little bit faster, easier plug-in options that you can use. Again, ZWrap or Wrap, or if you want to use the character creator topology, use the headshot plugin that they have, and I'll have videos on that and probably Wrap videos at some point on my YouTube channel. But again, we're just going to use ZBrush options. So move your head topology where it should go. Again, using any sculpting brushes that you want. Inflate, smooth. You can hold down shift and turn down your Z intensity on your smooth if it's too much while you're moving around low res geometry here. If you want to sculpt again through an object, make sure you're on transparency with ghost mode turned on, and then use your move brush just to kind of get stuff into place. I'm not going to spend a ton of time doing this, but again, for extreme changes like this, you're going to want to take time to get those points as close as possible. You can do it all manually. There are a couple tricks you can employ. They may have varying degrees of success depending on your mesh, but one thing you can do is, again, I'm going to put all the verts so they're kind of hanging out outside or above the geometry here, and then I'm going to try, may work, may not work, but I'm going to go through here. First, I'm going to get rid of the geometry that isn't going to add to the overall snapping here. So I'm just going to get rid of this geo here and then this geo here. There we go. So again, geometry modified topology, delete hidden. And then if I want to shrink wrap this, one thing I can try to do is I can go in here to dynamics. So we'll take the dynamics menu over here. I'm going to turn off gravity. We don't need floor collision. I'm basically going to contract this geometry to any other geometry in my scene. So I'm going to make sure just my moved points are showing, and then our original head sculpt here. And then I'm going to turn that contract amount way down, very, very small. The resolution, I'm going to crank up for my collision volume. Basically, anything showing in my scene that isn't my selected object is going to be considered a collision volume. And then the inflate, I'm going to turn, I'll turn that all the way down to 0. So hopefully, with these settings, I can go through here and I can hit Run Simulation, and that'll shrink wrap that geometry to the nearest vert. So again, run the simulation, let it do its thing, and then tap anywhere to kind of put that into place. So now that we've got it shrink wrapped, and again, we have, here's our head, and then here's our original head, we can go down here and say project all, and that'll project those verts to that head. So that's kind of a quick way to kind of go through and shrink wrap. If you have any areas that didn't quite conform, hold down Shift, smooth it. You can also use the ZProject Brush, so BZP. With this brush, you got to turn off X symmetry and then just ZProject 1/2. So you're going to hold down Alt and ZProject. It seems to be having quite a bit of a problem. I'm not sure why. Let's try this. I'm going to hold down Control and tap the latest point in history. And if it's hard to click the latest point in history, go in here to Edit, Delete Older Undo History. So now we're back to a very simple undo history. So I'm going to Control tap the latest point in history and then Control tap it again to get rid of any history points. And now let's see, BZP, ZProject Brush. There we go. So we're going to hold down Alt with these showing. Hold down Alt to pull up to a surface and let go of Alt to push down to a surface. And then these, they will force the geometry to kind of push back to that surface. If I go out of solo mode here and I want to match the geometry on the side we've been working on to the other side, hold down Control and mask that side because we want to keep those verts, and then go down here to Deformation, Smart Resym across the X-axis. That'll match those verts. Another option is if you want to, instead of using the ZProject brush, you can use a history recall brush. So I'm going to go back to my original head here, Control tap that point in history to store those verts, and then with just this one showing, we can use BHR, which is the history recall brush, and then instead of having to hold down Alt and let go of Alt, you can just use this brush. It'll automatically push and pull where it needs to. Again, you may have to turn on backface masking, so underneath brush, auto masking backface mask, to not pull through an object, and just like ZProject, turn X symmetry off. In fact, it'll yell at you if you try to use it with X symmetry on because it's camera based. So you're gonna, with both those brushes, you're gonna have to, move your brush around to where your camera is just looking straight back because it's just projecting straight back from your camera position while you're rotating your camera around on your model. If you don't do that, for example, and it's like, okay, let's get an obvious point here. We're just going to smooth this out. I'm going to project this to the ear. And if I go to the side here, if I'm looking right at it, again with BHR, it'll project just fine straight down. However, if I go at like a glancing angle and project, it'll project back, but it's going to push that geometry to where the stored vert positions are, and it's going to skew it pretty bad. So again, with these types of brushes, just look straight down at your model. Try not to look at a glancing angle, but look straight at your model and use the history recall brush or the ZProject brush to get those verts back. Again, this is a pretty extreme face with original the borrowed geometry that maybe wasn't set up great for it, but just wanted to show you another option for manually wrapping head topology to what you're working on. And just to show you one more example that's not a head, if I hit the comma key, I'm just going to go in here to Project. We'll double click the male ZPR and we'll load that up. So let's say we just have miscellaneous geometry. We'll pretend this is a, you know what, we don't even have to pretend. I'm going to go down here to Dynamesh, and I'm going to click and drag from the resolution slider onto my mesh, and then I'm going to Dynamesh that result. I'm going to hit no, I don't want to free subdivision levels. So now we just have a Dynameshed object of a human. So if I want to retopologize, say, this arm and this hand, I can split this off into easier tasks. So I'm going to say, okay, Control Shift drag over the hand, and then do a subtool split hidden. So now I've got the body and the hand in its own group. I can go through here, hold down Control Shift, and I can say slice curve where I want my polygroup lines to go. And in fact, just to kind of narrow down the scope of what we're ZRemeshing, I'm going to take this upper arm and lower arm, and then Geometry Modify Topology Delete Hidden. So I've got an arm here and then a hand here. So for the hand, and in fact, let's turn off X symmetry, and I'm just going to grab this hand on this side. Geometry Modify Topology, delete hidden again. We'll go ahead and turn off our floor and perspective. And local symmetry and polyframe. Well, we'll leave polyframe on. So for this hand, for example, we can go through here and say, you know, ZRemesher same, adaptive size down, maybe down to 14, hit ZRemesher. You can, I should probably talk about this too. So if we have this hand and we have this arm in a separate subtool, but the verts still line up on the border, I can select the top one, go down here, and if I want to weld these back, let's say I want to talk about something else, instead of splitting, I can say merge down. Make sure you have weld turned on. We don't have UV, so we'll go ahead and turn that off. So when I merge this down, it'll go ahead and weld my verts together. If you didn't have that or you forgot, you can go in here to Geometry, Modify Topology, and hit this Weld Points button. So now let's say we want to ZRemesh this arm. I'm going to hit Control W to make it all one polygroup. You can, again, go through here and say, okay, I'm going to slice through the elbow because I definitely want to line through here. I'm going to slice through the wrist. And then let's go ahead and hit ZRemesher. So again, Geometry, ZRemesher, we'll say half, keep groups, smooth groups down to 0, adapt to size down. If I turn it down all the way to 0, it's going to make everything nice, even quads, but it's really going to start eating away these fingers. There's a couple different ways around that. We can raise our adapt to size up, and that on these tight corners in here, it'll put in more geometry as needed. We can also go down here to use Polypaint, and now we'll have a color density. So I'm going to turn off Polyframe here, and you're going to see when we turn on use Polypaint and the color density set to 2, it'll give us like a light red color. It's turning the entire object that color. That's because we don't have colorize on. If we turn colorize on, you're going to see my verts are just white. If they're not, you can go in here to, you know, choose a white color, color, fill object, you'll have white verts. And then when we go down here and say, okay, use Polypaint, you'll see when I choose a white color, it'll change the color density to 1. That's basically removing any Polypaint density influence. If we want to add influence, we can say 2, and then that's going to choose a pink color for us. So we can go through here, we're going to turn on we have a standard brush, turn on RGB, turn off Z-Add, or you can do B, P, A to go to your paintbrush, whatever you want to use. And we're going to go through here and we can paint our hand to be a higher density than the rest of our arm. And we can also use that in conjunction with our polygroups here. In fact, instead of painting this, you can also Control-Shift-Tap to isolate this polygroup, and then go in here to Color, Fill Object with RGB intensity set at 100, and now it'll just fill this with a color. Of course, if you want to add a little blur between those, you can, or a little fall off between those, you can go through and paint. So anyway, this will give us a higher density. Of course, if you want to color with a lower density, you can say like 0.25, and then you can paint a lower density color. You'll see it picked a light blue for us. I'm going to keep this at density of 1 multiplier and then a 2x multiplier on the hand. And now when I say turn on Polyframe and say ZRemesher with these options, it will keep our groups. So wherever we put our group slice, it'll put that there, and you'll see it goes from being this dense to this dense here. So instead of half, let's choose, you know, maybe we'll drop this way down. So now we have big polygons up here, and then as we get towards the hand, it's giving us more polygons. So that's another option. Of course, if I hit Control Z, we are losing a lot of volume here. So remember, Control Tap these points in history to store them. Go ahead and run your ZRemesher, and then go back up here to Project History. So if you want to project your Polypaint, you can. I'm going to go ahead and say no, and that'll move those points back out. But like I wanted to mention at the very beginning, you can also work on these as separate objects. So if you just want to Control-Shift-Tap the hand or slice it off, or Control-Shift-Drag over it, and then say Subtool, Split Hidden. You know, now we can just work on the hand and ZRemesh the hand. We can just ZRemesh the arm. And I'm going to interject this right here. If you did want to work on the hand and the arm, but you wanted to keep those verts where they connect the exact same, when you go to ZRemesher, for example, I'll switch it over here to half. I'm going to say freeze border. So now when I ZRemesh half, it'll go ahead and freeze the border vert positions and then reduce the rest of the arm. Again, probably not great for animation, but if you needed to use that to your advantage, remember, it's just freeze border. Again, we can do half and then ZRemesh, and it'll keep those border verts the same. So when we do, want to weld these two back, the verts will match up. And in fact, if you want, I'm going to go here to BI Brush Insert IMM primitives. I'm going to hit M on my keyboard. We're going to go ahead and grab an insert cylinder. I'm going to drag that over our arm here. I can even go in here to bend curve, for example, and I'm going to take this orange slider and add a little bit of resolution. So I'm going to drag this dot up, and then we're going to choose scale to scale it out, and then this dot down, and we're going to again choose scale here, so we can kind of move this generally into place where it should go. I'm going to go down here to split mass points. I'm going to move these into place, and then if I had a high-res object just like we did with the head, we can use just primitive geometry and wrap it to our arm. I do want to get rid of our end caps here, so if I go into solo mode here, you're going to see I've got my two end caps here. You can hold down Alt with your ZModeler brush, BZM, and you can just paint this. Another easy way to do it is go down here to Polygroups or go into your custom menu. I can do group by normals, max angle of 45 is probably fine, and then Control-Shift tap the pink, geometry modified topology, delete hidden, and now with this geometry out over your arm, you can do your Shrinkwrap trick with dynamics. Again, gravity off, contract on, go ahead and redo your collision volume, so go ahead and touch that button to make sure that the other objects in your scene are set as collision, and now when I run the simulation, it'll shrink wrap this geometry to your arm. Now it is shrinking in all directions, so X, Y, and Z. You can tell it to contract, for example, in just the Y, and then it'll just shrink along that axis. You can also crank up this amount so it doesn't go so slow. There we go. So now it'll just kind of shrink wrap to our arm, and then once it's done, you can hold down Shift and you can smooth this out. You can use your ZProject or Project History brush, or of course, just go down here and say project all, and that'll project your geometry, your shrink wrap geometry to that. And then you can go through and stitch like we were talking about earlier. And actually, one thing I should talk about is projecting your detail back once you do rebuild the geometry. So I'm going to go into hit the comma key to go to my Lightbox quick save. I'm going to open up this previous file we were working on, and I'll have some low-res geometry. And I have my original high-res mesh here. So let's switch back over to matte cap gray in our material here, or green metallic, whatever you like to use. So let's pretend like I had finished this out and we're ready to project our detail back. So two ways to do that, and we've kind of already talked about them. So for example, if I have one object showing and another one showing, I can go down here to Subtool Project All, and then anything that's visible opposite. So I've had this selected, so I had multiple subtools visible besides the one I have selected. It'll project to all of them. In this case, I just have one object, so I'm going to go down here and say Project All. That'll project my verts to the verts that are showing, and then all I have to do is go down here to Geometry Divide. If I go to solo mode, you'll see that'll subdivide, and then again, I can just hit Project All underneath my project settings. You'll see even though I'm in solo mode, because the eyeball is turned on for the other subtool, it'll project just fine. So again, Project All, Control D to subdivide, Project All, Control D to subdivide, Project All, and now we've got all of our details back for our face, and we can drop down in our subdivision history like that. Another option is we can have this object, or it can be a completely separate subtool. So if I, clone this off and then delete it out of my subtool stack. So let's drop down to our lowest subdivision. I'm going to say delete higher. So here's our low res geometry. In another subtool completely, I have another piece of high res geometry that I want to project to. So remember, just with this object selected, control click that point in history. If you already had one stored, just control click twice and that'll delete any stored history, and then you can just control click in this state that it's in. So it'll save these vert positions as a state. Even if it had Polypaint, it'll project that too if you'd like. We'll go back to our low-res geometry. We'll scroll down, and instead of doing Project All, since there is no other object in the scene, Project All is actually going to be grayed out. We can do a Project History. So again, Control D, Project History, or hit the Divide button, Project History, and that will go ahead and project from that stored history state to our new low-res geometry. I do want to bring up, instead of waiting for dynamic simulation to do its thing, and also deciding which axis you want it to shrink on, you can also go in here to, if we hit B on our keyboard, that brings up the brush menu. T to narrow it down to the transpose brushes, R is regular transpose. That's when you just move stuff around. However, BTC is transpose cloth. So when you move this around, it'll actually collide. As long as you set your collision volume and all that stuff, you can move this around and it'll collide with your object. Now you can also use that with scale. So I can scale this object down, it'll start colliding with the object. I can scale it this way, it'll start colliding with the object. And that's another way to shrink wrap topology to another asset here. And of course you can use this in conjunction with polish by features, and then again transpose cloth. Alternatively, you can also instead of scaling down in this direction, scaling down in this direction with these two axes, hold down Alt and scale in this direction, and that will pull in that direction. So again, if your gizmo is off in space, just go to Unmatched Mesh Center, Alt, and then tap that teardrop icon, and then go through here and hold down Alt and position this, and then again hold down Alt and then pull along the X-axis to scale and shrink wrap in that direction. This is also something we covered in the ZBrush 2021 What's New. So I'm going to go to, we can just watch this together. Same kind of deal. We have our primitives that we're laying out. So here's the primitives, here's the primitive. We'll bridge between those two, again using dynamic cloth to kind of shrink wrap, and then subdividing and projecting and getting our detail back, as well as taking an entire character model and then using shrink wrap and then projecting our details back. So getting a whole new topology, head and body. And then going through here and then using the ZModeler surface, again, all the stuff we talked about, ZModeler brush, surface snapping, extrude edge, and then starting with just this sphere topology around, again, the important parts of my face, and then just bridging in between. So just extrude and then bridge and extrude, extrude, bridge, 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 and just building a face like that using that brush. Another option. And then if you want to get fancy too, you can have a flattened face ready to go. You can move that in, and then you can use cloth simulation and the brush transpose, just kind of pull that geometry across a face. So yeah, all sorts of cool ways you can, come up with topology using ZBrush methods and subtool projection and history recall projection and all that good stuff. So I'll go ahead and stop this video, but I think you get the idea.